Hello, I'm Steph from hslda Canada, and I am here today to talk about catching learning challenges early. This is a topic as a homeschooler that you may already be familiar with or that you need to know a bit about. But I think every homeschooler would really benefit just knowing about learning challenges, knowing about some of those warning signs, and just the different things to look for. So I am joined here today with Diane Geerlinks. She is the professional, not me. I'm just going to prompt her with a few questions, and she is the one that's going to tell us how to catch those learning challenges early. One thing I'm going to show you, though, is our recently published magazine, College and Career Guide for Homeschoolers. So in this magazine, don't think that it's just about for parents in those high school ages. It's really for parents at any age, even if you're thinking about homeschooling. Because in here, of course, there's lots of stuff about post-secondary, about the high school years, and lots of different tips and ideas in here about that stage. But there's also just about that really excellent quality education that we can give our kids as we educate them as parents and guide their education. As many of us know, we're not always the one teaching. We're just the ones finding the right resources for them and the right materials for them. And I also want to highlight an article in here is, let me just make sure I get the article title right. So post-secondary preparation for teens with learning challenges. So this is an article by Diane, and in it she shares 6 different steps on how to prepare your teen for post-secondary education. And in that number three step, so Diane, you mentioned about being able to develop strategies and accommodations. So let's start off with you sharing about what those strategies and accommodations are, because I think that's a great way for us to kind of understand that why the learning of the strategies and the accommodations, and then we'll go in on how to catch those learning challenges early. So take it away, Diane.
Sure. Well, thank you for inviting me to share. Yeah, as we prepare our students for post-secondary, it really is important that they're prepared, on all levels. And I think for students that have learning differences, they especially need to know how do they do this best? How do they learn best? And what strategies will work for me? And so in the article, I believe I talk about, like, do they need extra time on their tests? Do they need to have, somebody read the questions to them so that, they know how to read perhaps, but it just will be helpful if somebody can read it, then they can process it, and then they can tell them, maybe the scribe to help them. And those are all accommodations that are available in post-secondary. And so that leads me to, well, even with the strategies, if I'm thinking about post-secondary strategies or preparing, they need to know themselves. Do I learn best by reading an article, by listening to an audiobook about this topic? Do I need my textbook in an auditory format? Do I need to, how am I going to memorize things? How do I hold it in my brain? Do I need to make visual cue cards? Because visually, that is how I take in information and keep it for myself. So those are strategies that I'm passionate about helping our students prepare for post-secondary so that they're ready when they get there. Because our kids, we may think they just won't be able to do post-secondary because they can't write an essay or they can't, but they can. They can do hard things. They need to know what their strategies are. And just this weekend, I was meeting with parents of 2 students homeschool students that I taught with educational therapy, but both of them doing exciting post-secondary opportunities, one in a post-secondary institution, one in another educational course. And it was just delightful to see how they now know what their strengths and weaknesses are and then guide them. So yeah, I think post-secondary wise, the article talks about, but that's one of the things that we need to prepare for.
Makes me think of one of the stories. So we have a section there, and it's just a few stories of some different homeschoolers getting into post-secondary. She went on to doing photography. She owns her own photography studio and something to do with more digital arts, digital graphic work. And she talked about that struggle throughout, and she just had a hard time processing. And I
Yeah.
and I know that because I deal with that with my very oldest as well as my ones now. It's like I tell and I tell them and encourage them like you know how to do this. Like you've shown how to do this, but sometimes they are not, yeah, to even put a sentence together seems like it's so difficult. And me as a writer, so I have to relate,
Yeah.
I have to try to relate to that. It's like me as like it's as easy as talking. It's like you just so I've had to adjust that, right? So I think that's a
Yes.
really important thing, and that a little bit from my own experience is I got a little bit too caught up in this is easy. Like this is how a sentence works. This is what it needs. This is how you get your thoughts in your head down on paper, but it does not work the same in their head. And even though I was aware of that early on,
Mhm.
I think it took me a little bit to really bring that out, and I could probably still use some more improvement on that to bring that out to them and fit in some of these other strategies, or as you say, like the accommodations, like being able to, okay, so how about how about we read this out loud? Or actually a lot of online stuff too can be, you have that option to have it read out loud to you
Yeah.
or to take it in a video format. So lots of the courses and curriculum, not everything, because I don't want everything online. I don't want everything with a screen. But there are certainly subjects where this is great to have it online and learning online and that way.
And I would say, we are in such a digital age that there's speech to print, so I can talk into my phone and it will write it out for me. There's these options that are accommodations for our weaknesses or our areas of need, and they're amazing. And yes, there's the but. So yesterday I talked to a parent of a student in the school system who's saying they want to give lots of accommodations, and that's nice, but I want him to learn how to write. So that's the rub, right? We have this, we want to accommodate and support them. At the same time, we want to teach them. And so I think often as homeschooler, I see on social media, or I have parents that talk to me with, my kid's in grade 2 and they're not writing. They won't write anything. Like they can't write. And, well, let's talk about what they're writing. And then I often will break it down to, hey, well, you can't expect them to write a paragraph if they can't write a sentence. And you can't expect them to write a sentence if they can't write a word. So you have to kind of back it up, because I think, says me from the homeschool mom experience, you're
Mhm.
just like, and possibly you who knows how to write, you're like, here, write this. And they look at you like, huh? An hour or two later, they're still sitting there and they've got 2 words down. You're like, seriously, just do it.
And
So
that's
I
when I'm
think,
like, I need more patience in this area because it is frustrating.
right.
So those that are watching know that, yeah, definitely I've experienced that. Yes, Diane, you've
And so
experienced
have
that in
I.
your homeschooling years with your own children.
Yeah.
And it is something where, yeah, it's frustrating, but we just being able to be patient with that. And I guess that's understanding. And actually, I think if a few of these strategies that I put in place helps me then. Like it comes into my head then when starting to get frustrated, it's like, oh yeah, we can do it this way too. So
And it
that's
is hard for them. Even just the reality of knowing this is hard for them. This isn't them just being lazy or trying to just make my day difficult. It
just
really
like
is
what my
hard for
mind
them.
thinks sometimes.
Yeah. Well, of course.
Yeah.
But then it also comes to really, I guess that segues into what do we catch early? What actually, like, what is normal and what it means they do need
Yeah.
some extra support. And in
Huh?
order to get that extra support at college, you do need a psychoeducational assessment, because that's the paper that says, yes, you are able and eligible for these accommodations. And so having that diagnosis, or the more so the piece of paper that says these are the accommodations this child needs, student, that's going to help them achieve these goals. And for both of these students this weekend that I met with again, both of them used the accommodations of the institution. So one does the test orally, right? And is getting high honors, right? Because we're realizing finally that there's many different ways to learn and to express. And if we know it and we can show what we know, whether that's in writing or speaking or presentation, then at least we, that's what they need. And so I think that helps.
Hmm.
You were talking about identifying, and I think early identification is always best. And as I talk to many, like numerous homeschooling families weekly, sometimes daily, I see that struggle, right? And I myself didn't get find or have my own son tested until he was 15, because back and then it was just like, well, we just didn't do that, we'll just keep moving along. And it was until we kind of hit a road that was like, I need help and he needs help, and how's he going to ever get to college? And so that's when I reached out to an NILD therapist, educational therapist. And that's when he also had an assessment. But it's hard when they're 15 because you've got attitude and you've got, they're already shamed. And, even our students that aren't in a school system feel this shame
Hmm.
because they go to church events, they go to other events, and somebody asks them to read something and they can't read it, and they start to feel this cloud of shame. And we want them to, we want to keep building them up to be able to say, where are your strengths and how can we build up your weaknesses? So I
Hmm.
think I'm always holding those two things. Let's look at your strengths and how do we build up these weaknesses.
Yeah. So you have a really neat a warning signs checklist. I'm going to put this a really easy link for you on the screen here. But tell us about that, because this list goes from, is it 5 years old? So you have it in three kind of categories, three age levels, and I think that's a key thing for us as parents to think of. Okay, like what's normal at this age?
It really is just it's from the NILD. It's on my website, on yours. It's part of the NILD Canada website as well. And it just really has lists of, here, if they're 5 to 7. If you see 3 or more things here that your child struggles with, that could mean that there's something else going on. And I think that just helps us all. Doesn't mean like, oh man, this is terrible. This means, oh no, well, that explains why it's hard. And so you want to then go down, go deeper to find out, okay, what else could be going on? So I think as you go through this list, we're looking at things like, should they be writing or letter reversals, right? That often is something people look at. While
Hmm.
letter reversals are fine and normal, but if they're still doing it at 7, 8, it's not normal. Usually by then it starts to switch and they realize and they can see it. And if it's not, then it doesn't mean the world has come to an end. What it means is, you know, why is it still reversed? What's happening in the brain? Why is this still reversed? And there's not only letters, it's sometimes in numbers, etc. Same thing with learning to read, right? A child, not everybody learns to read at age 5.8. 6 years, 3 months, or 8 years, 2 months, right? It's a progression. And so that whole thing, if they're, when, and then even then we're asking, what is reading? If they can read a Bob book, is that my child can read? Or if they can read the Bible, is that my child can read? What defines what reading is? Does my child, because reading development never ends. Like we even now continue to learn to read. We read at, we can read more difficult novels. We grow in our ability to understand it. We can learn how to skim things. We continue to learn to read. And so for our children, we want that continuing happening. But if you've done, a reading program in grade kindergarten and another reading program in grade 1 and another reading program and nothing's happening, you're pulling out your hair, you're like, okay, something's going on. So some people will say, throw the whole thing away and try again the next year, right? And maturity is affected for sure, but we do want to continue that teaching of seeing what else can we do? What other, I call it modalities, do we bring in? What kind of visual, auditory, kinesthetic to help them make those brain connections? So those are the things I think early on, was you may even look at catching it early. Like, first of all, what was your family history? That's not on the learning styles checklist, but if there's family history of a learning challenge or ADHD, genetics play a part. So you're looking, okay, how does this affect my child, right? What about their birth history? What happened, during birth or pregnancy? What was going on? Those are things that affect us and our children, right? What kind of trauma? Was there a head injury? Was there a lot of concussions? Was there a lot of earaches? Like these things when in speech development, what was going on? So using these little flags to kind of go, yeah, okay, so now they're struggling with reading. All right, there's been things going on all along. Maybe they never crawled, right? They talked late. So these warning signs or flags that then help us to see, sort of just add a few of those up and you're like, okay, I think I should take a closer look.
Mm-hmm.
And when we get to um, support or identify these differences early on, our children are so far much further ahead because now you understand it as a parent, they understand it as a child or a student, and together you move towards that finish line. And I think that's one of the best reasons I can ever say is when, my own son would say, the psych ed changed my life. So here he is at age 15. First his first response was, "What, you think I'm dumb?" But once he did the whole process,
Hmm.
he was just like, when he finished the whole process, he was like, that psych ed helped me understand how I learn. And that gave me the confidence to go on to post secondary. And that gave me the confidence. I mean, that alone, he did have a year and a half of educational therapy, but it gave him what he felt like he needed. Like, I'm not dumb at all. I'm smart. But, my auditory processing holds me back. And how can I use my strength of visual processing to support this weakness to now move ahead?
Yeah, I think as we get into those teen years too, there's so many other factors that's going on with how our kids are learning, like you said, about attitude. And I mean, just that really transition, right? There's lots of changes happening. It's kind of that transition into adulthood, right? So it's something where our kids and as parents, we're trying to move with the changes well. And sometimes
Totally.
we're not always identifying those learning challenges because I think, and you speak on this, but I'm kind of thinking that some learning challenges really don't show up until the teen years. And I just in my own experience, when we get into
Hmm.
more difficult stuff, so stuff that requires more thought, stuff that requires more lengthier answers, whether it be written or speaking, there's just a lot more um,
Hmm.
different kinds of material either to look at and read and understand than there are in some of those elementary ages.
I like that. And actually, I don't know that I've thought of that, but I have a thought. I think that as homeschoolers, we are already accommodating our students because we work with them one on one. If they were in school, we would recommend that they be pulled out and work with somebody and work one on one. But we don't have to do that because that's happening.
Huh.
Now, we may have 5 children or more. It's one on one. So you've already guided them all the way through. And maybe where where it really starts to show up, as you say, is when you're now saying, okay, come on, like now you need to be able to do this on your own.
Mm.
Right. And that's when it might show up. I wouldn't say that's when it was probably there all along. I
Mhm.
just think I just think it manifests itself at those times. And even organization, like we expect more as the years go on, and that those executive functions take time for the brain to make all those connections. How do I plan? How do I organize? How do I set my alarm and get up on time and start my work? And of course with teenagers, we're talking about, their sleep cycles changing, right? So there's changes going on, but a lot of these cognitive functions that they need in order to be able to manage the workload and the lengthier answers and the more thoughtful responses, etc.
It's just as I say with almost anything, but especially with learning, it's just practice. Like, you're just going to be able to practice and do that task more often. So whether it be writing or even with math, one of the things I kind of share about, I don't think any of my kids, either of my kids, I've got two boys and they're 14 and 17, and I don't think either one of them are going into anything that there's a great deal of math that they need to know. I mean, just foundational math is good to know for life, but I actually really like them to get into this math that even I certainly don't remember now. I'm kind of learning along the way. And then sometimes I'm
Right.
not. They've got a program there that teaches them and they go through. So I don't necessarily have to teach them. However, when they are struggling with something and they're just not getting it, that's when I need to go in and I need to learn that. And I think this is brain activity. I call it brain exercise. So it doesn't matter if you're going to learn that, if you're going to do anything with that knowledge. It's actually not so much about the knowledge as it is about making your brain work. And that math, for
Totally.
instance, is something that's really that will come into play. Maybe not
Yeah.
using that math, but
Yeah. No,
that
no,
thought
totally.
process,
It's called critical thinking skills
right?
and being able to think about your thinking. So often in our therapy, in my courses, in my own, I was just did a lesson on this too in my membership, but talking about thinking about our thinking. How do we help our students think their strategy? Why did I do that? How did I do that? And so that those higher level algebra is not about, when am I going to use this algebra again?
Mhm.
Because I might never, just like you say. It's about stretching our thinking because our thinking skills are what we're going to need, problem solving, understanding, making those brain connections. So important as we teach our children that they can stretch their thinking.
And we do that all
Yeah.
throughout adulthood. Like, I just think even the past year or past 2 years, like just in the areas that I've grown in knowledge, but not just about, hey, now I know this. It's really about, well, now I can be faced with this situation and I can deal with it more effectively, right? My brain has organized that type of thinking a little bit better than I used to, and now I can do this process much much
Totally.
easier. So learning never ends, of
Never
course.
ends. No, it doesn't.
I wanted to mention one of those. So our member, so Diane, I don't know if we mentioned this to begin with. So Diane is our exceptional needs specialist for members for HSLDA Canada. So once a year as a member, you can have a up to 1 hour, I guess, consultation with Diane that is really specific to I mean, she's given great information just in general, but until she actually knows a situation, she can't give you some of those. And I imagine you do that, right? You give the strategies and maybe some ways you can work once you hear that story. That's kind of what a
Yeah,
consultation looks like
absolutely.
with members.
Right. So I set up an appointment and I send out a simple form for you parents to fill out. So I have a bit of an idea going into it. And then we chat on the phone and I just gather information. I call it a time for you to share about your child that you're concerned about. And I'm taking notes and thinking about it. And then together, because you're the expert of your kid. I've never met them, but it's our time to then work together to say, okay, maybe try this, maybe this. What about this curriculum? I sometimes will guide curriculum choices based on what you're telling me your child can do or cannot do. And yeah, we talk about, interventions and what else you could maybe do and look to support your child. It's very fun.
Yes, I've heard only good things about it from members. So it's a great service and we just saw the need for that. So that's why we put it right in with our
Hmm.
membership. There was just really, really that need to have that one-on-one time that just you really get to be able to, yeah, as you said, talk about those concerns with somebody that kind of is very experienced in all those different ideas, strategies, and maybe that, hey, there's something to even look into further because you've got lots of expertise and skill, but there is sometimes learning challenges, brain development that needs to be looked at deeper. And I believe that you can kind of identify that and say recommend a
Yeah.
further course if it if it needs to be.
Yeah, I would say it's a treetop view. You're kind of looking over the whole thing and trying to gather information, saying, well, this is maybe what I'm seeing right now. If you really want to get into the weeds, it's going to need more than an hour chat with me, but it will definitely get you started onto the journey of how do I support this child that learns differently. Or maybe it's all in my head. I mean, mostly as moms, there's just mom's guilt. Like, I should have. What if she says I should have used a different curriculum earlier? Like we all have this thing we carry that, we all, well, I had 5 kids and they were busy and my husband had a car accident and like blah, 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 which is my story. And so, yeah, I didn't spend enough time with this child. And so I think just coming together with somebody to say, yeah, but kids learn to read even without all that instruction. Not saying you do need to teach them, but generally kids continue to develop and learn even when. So I often will write, in my workshops, even when things aren't great, their learning does continue, thankfully. But for reading, especially, research is showing it needs explicit and systematic instruction. And that's sort of the more and more research is coming out to prove that we must teach them all the phonetics, all the rules, that the brain is not naturally wired to read, but we are helping it rewire itself. It's
Mhm,
wired to speak. That's how we're made. But
mhm.
we have to help the brain learn this thing called reading.
So you do a lot with, so Chris, you're connected to HSLDA Canada. You work with our members and you do lots of stuff. You actually, great member video if you're a member and haven't seen Diane's latest video on the
Yeah.
website, a workshop video, laziness, late bloomer, or a learning disability. It is a great look at kind of the same kind of topic, right? Which one does your child fit into? And maybe a little bit of both, depending on
Yeah.
the issue. But also share about what you do. So you have a business outside of that, Geerlinks Educational Therapy.
So, yeah, I have my own therapy practice and I have therapists that work with me here. And we do online educational therapy and in person. But my website it has an overview of different learning differences. So, poke around on it. There's also a homeschooling page. So, I talk a little bit about homeschooling certain students with learning differences. And then there's a link there for this membership so that I do have a spot where homeschoolers, specifically, I call it the unique homeschool mom, who can join this membership where I do a teaching once a month and their handout and I interview experts and I do a question and answer on Zoom once a month so people can come in and ask questions. We support each other. It's our own little support group.
So more information on this topic that you can also find on hslda.ca. So we have an exceptional needs category on our website. I'll put that link on the video here. We also have a high school section. So that covers a lot of different things as well as kind of that transition into post-secondary, but really preparing in the high school years and just high school education overall. And then also our magazine, as I showed earlier here. This is, it's fairly evergreen, but we did just publish it in February. So college and career guide for homeschoolers, lots of great stuff in there. And you can get that digitally at hslda.ca /cc-guide. So there's the link for you here to look at, but you can go to that webpage and you can see the embedded the digital magazine and see all the great stuff we have in there. Great. Well, thank you very much for joining me, Diane. I have learned a
You're
lot.
welcome. It's wonderful. It's always a privilege to support homeschool families.